Hello and a very warm welcome. I'm Barkhadat and you're watching The Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive into the stories that really matter. And what could matter more at this point than how India is preparing for what will be the world's largest vaccine rollout. The first consignment of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines are now moving. That you can see that consignment there on your screen. 11 million doses of that have already been purchased by the government, which is looking at 30 crore people being vaccinated over the next few months. The Prime Minister, at a special meeting with chief ministers, has made it clear that there will be no out-of-queue vaccinations for politicians or government employees and frontline workers continue to have first rights over those vaccines. But even as the vaccine rolls out and India gets ready for this mammoth immunization inoculation program, questions and debates persist around data transparency. We've had any number of immunologists asking whether there has been enough transparency when it comes to both of India's approved vaccines. Remember, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is one of them, and the other is Covaxin, which has been approved for a trial mode. We'll explain in the course of the program exactly what that means. But let's introduce our experts on the program today. We're joined by Dr. Veer Chauhan, and we're also joined by Dr. Vinita Bal. It's a pleasure having both of you on the program. I will start with you, Vinita, if I may, because I'm very aware of Veer Chauhan's positions. He's been on the program before. He said he would be happy to take either of those two vaccines just for the benefit of our audience. Currently, the difference is Covaxin means that you will still need to fill a consent form. You'll still need to be tracked. Its clearances are not at the same level as Oxford AstraZeneca, but 11 million of that Serum Institute manufactured vaccine is now ready to roll out on the 16th. Vinita, you have gone on record to say you have some apprehensions, some reservations about the absence of data transparency. Can you please speak to what those concerns are?
The concerns are more of a ethical nature, because as a democratic nation where we have governance rules, our people experts have set up the rules. They started with original Helsinki Declaration, WHO approval. For emergency approval also, the CDSCO, which is the highest authority in the country, has set up some rules. And unfortunately, I feel that for Covaxin, those rules have not been followed properly. And the rules normally say that with hurried clearance, and hurried clearance doesn't mean compromise on safety, but hurried clearance certainly means that very long period is not observed post-vaccination. So for Covaxin, the 2 doses have just been given. There isn't enough, the minimum number of people who have been followed after 2 doses to see whether there is or how much protection there is. I'm sure Covaxin is going to give protection, but how much we do not know. And I think the government setting up rules and then flouting the rules is something that I disapprove of, because unfortunately that creates confusions in people's mind, and this period of a pandemic is so full of confusion that less we add to it, better it is.
Okay, before I let Dr. Veer Chauhan respond to this, let me just give you my very layperson's understanding basis interviewing a number of experts who think slightly differently from you. I know others who think like you and then some others who don't think like you. And the ones who don't think like you, for example, Kiran Shaw was on this program and she made the argument that efficacy of any vaccine actually takes up to a year to really assess. So even the claims of efficacy that are being made by the other 3 vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna on the global stage and Oxford AstraZeneca in India, are actually not fully known. We will only get to know them after a period of time. So her argument was that what matters right now is safety and immunogenicity. And she said that she has no reason to believe that Covaxin is lacking on either of these 2 parameters. And therefore, what's important was to focus on safety. And she believed that Covaxin had met that threshold. How do you respond to that?
I understand that. That's why I said that all the vaccines which are in the emergency approval stage have shown short-term protection, which is not surprising. I also said I'm sure Covaxin will also fall into that category. but there is some sanctity about the regulations that we need to consider. So if you ask me personally, I wouldn't be worried about taking even Covaxin, because I don't think there are going to be major side effects or problems associated with that. But that doesn't mean that in general there are rules which should be flouted, which
Can
is
you
what
explain that contradiction? Can you explain that contradiction, that you would
yes,
not
because
hesitate? You would not hesitate to take Covaxin. You do not believe it's unsafe, but you're not comfortable with shortcuts.
yes,
Am I summarizing you correctly?
shortcuts, yes, and that is why I said that in another probably 6 to 8 weeks, Covaxin would also have had enough time to look at how many vaccinated or placebo given people would come down with COVID 19, and they will have very similar data which Pfizer or Oxford vaccine have had so far, or the Serum Institute, other vaccines, emergency approved vaccines have had so far, which is something that I think it's a short period. And I'm also convinced about the safety of the Covaxin vaccine. And I also know as an immunologist that if there is a virus given, based on the history, it's one of the inactivated vaccine, and inactivated viral vaccines have been common. So inactivated vaccines do generate immune responses, and hence, as an immunologist, I wouldn't have worry in principle about Covaxin's efficacy. But that doesn't mean that on a mass scale, when the vaccine is being released for use, there should be propriety which is followed, there should be proper norms which should be followed. Otherwise, tomorrow I can also say this for something else, that the some of these remedies which are not being tested, they should also be taken by somebody. Am I willing to say that? No. So it's a question of the procedure and the rules and regulations.
Let me just bring in at this point Dr. Veer Chauhan into the conversation. Dr. Chauhan, what I'm understanding from Dr. Vinita Bal is the following: that her worry is less about whether Covaxin per se is safe. She believes that it is, she would take it. She thinks that because it works on that inactivated virus principle, it would have a good immunogenicity, but she doesn't agree with the flouting of the conventional norms that are followed for any vaccine approval, and she believes it's setting an unhealthy precedent for the future.
So actually, Vinita has not. She's not disagreed with anything that I had said earlier to you. So I think the 98-99% of ground is very common, except for whether and we in this country, even on your channel, we've really struggled with this. Is it a communication problem? Is it a truly corner cutting? Are we setting precedents for future pandemic vaccine releases and so on? Those are areas of concern. There's no question about it. But we are in a pandemic. So I'm not going to really get drawn more into it than we've all said it. And Vinita just now said we don't need to add to any more confusion to this. This has been discussed, debated. At least I felt it was a problem of communication. And finally, as you know, now it has been clarified that when the Bharat Biotech vaccine comes out, it will be in a phase 3 trial mode. Of course, that there's a layer of confusion in it, but at least that much clarity is there that if you get that shot, you will have a written consent and so on and so forth. So I think I like to leave this chapter behind and move on. But let me just say something which is coming up. These two set of vaccines that came up very fast, that is an mRNA based and the viral vector based, came out because they could be created faster, the science was better known, etc. They're easy to manufacture. There are vaccines that are yet to come, which is like the viral like particle vaccine of Novavax and so on. It's going to be so difficult now to conduct phase 3 trials, especially in a country like India now, where A, confusion, B, transmission rates are so low. Mm-hmm. So if you do the safety and if you do the immunogenicity and wait for, which we are arguing that you should, it will be year before you get your phase 3 data sorted out because you have such low transmission right now. So this is going to be international, worldwide worry where can you do the trials? Where would you get the volunteers from for the next 5 vaccines?
Yeah. So let me actually get Vinita to respond to that. We've also got Sudhir Krishna from IIT Goa joining us, but I do want Vinita to just come in on Dr. Chauhan's point that he doesn't largely disagree, but that you do have to remember that we're not in a normal situation, and therefore we've got to accelerate in a way that we wouldn't have to in peacetime. And are you convinced by that?
Yes and no, because I think if this was a case of Ebola, I would have wholeheartedly supported it, because Ebola virus is causes a lot more mortality, a lot more death, much more dangerous. And in that situation, emergency vaccine was used, which was in phase 3 or something, and I understand that. But I feel that SARS-CoV-2 as a virus and COVID-19 as a disease are no comparison if you look at Ebola virus disease. So that the danger of dying with SARS-CoV-2 is much lower, and already we have many more people who have been infected because of the pandemic. So in a way, I agree with Professor Chauhan's point that it is harder to find people who will get the infection now. But the hurry is something that I still feel that waiting for 6 more weeks or 8 more weeks is not going to be earth shaking in that sense. But I am an academician. I'm not a commercial. I do not work in a pharma company. So there are other interests also which people are more interested in or cater for, which are not of primary concern to me.
But I do find it very significant that you have spoken about the fatality rate of the COVID-19, because I do believe from traveling extensively across India, reporting this pandemic, at least in India, especially when you look at the Sero service data, it will tell you that actually this virus, while being massively contagious, is not massively fatal in the way that was first feared. But the point, Vinita, is that nobody's actually coming out and saying that. Nobody is saying that, right? The serological service clearly tell you that the official numbers of those infected is highly undercounted, that the actual number could be 30 to 40 times higher. But equally, then the percentage of those dying from this virus is much lower. But nobody is actually coming out and saying this critical thing. And also, is this possibly an India-specific reality? I just want to take that to Vinita and then get Veer Chauhan and Sudhir Krishna.
Sorry. No, I don't think it is India specific. There isn't anything genetic about us which is providing any particular protection. Infection fatality rate as it should be counted, not the case fatality rate, because there are more variations. But we do not have adequate number of sero surveys conducted, because of which we do not know the denominator, which is how many people were infected. So based on small samples and small serological surveys, our infection fatality rate was less than 1%, something like 0.4, 0.13 in different parts of the country, which was pretty much the same as many others. Of course, there will be little differences between the countries. So, and this was not the case with Ebola, where Ebola was prevalent. So that is the point that I do want to make, and I think that is an important point. Maybe this is a miscommunication, but jargon is not so easy to communicate on a very large scale. I mean, I'm talking to you. I'm sure your listeners, dedicated listeners, would listen to this. But at the same time, the reach is limited. And that is something that we need to worry about. And even ASHA workers and others who will be involved in the vaccination program also need to be told that this should be conveyed, that it's not such a risky thing, but vaccine is likely to help to an extent.
Well, I think the other problem that has happened is that the opening up of the economy fully has somehow in the minds of people got linked to this vaccine, right? So whether it's air travel, whether it's work from work as opposed to work from home, so many things in the mind, in the collective mind, are now linked to this vaccine. And I just want to bring in Dr. Veer Chauhan here, because actually what Vinita said is, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an immunologist, I'm just a journalist covering this story. And that is my sense from looking at the data. And I think what I'm hearing Vinita say is that we press the panic button on accelerating the clearances to the vaccine. Panic that was not needed given the IFR, the infection fatality rate.
Every country in the world is wanting to vaccinate. I haven't heard from any part of the world. Some countries simply haven't been able to access vaccine. And I saw something in South Africa where the trials were done. So trials were done in South Africa, but the country has not been able to. So I don't agree. I think everybody, every country, every government, for reason one or the other, if you were living in London right now, you won't be arguing this. You will be rushing to get a vaccine as quickly as possible. If you're living in
Because London is
California,
shut. Because of the lockdown approach, that's what I'm
no,
saying,
whatever,
sir. Is the reason that we the world took a lockdown approach to this because we didn't understand, there wasn't enough science on it in the beginning. We were very worried about its fatality. In the West, they seem to have actually mismanaged it to a degree that India has not. There are humanitarian decisions that I disagree with, but medically we seem to have actually handled it better. So my question is, everyone's rushing for the vaccine not because we're going to die if we don't get the vaccine, but because we want our economy back, we want our cities back. Aren't these two different things, Veer Chauhan?
you could layer that. I mean, we could argue that successfully because you can't open your schools because you're not sure the virus will be there. You can't open your universities. So take a call. Everybody should take a call, whether you want this or you don't want this. Till only yesterday, breathtakingly, we were waiting for vaccines to come. Now, when vaccines are beginning to arrive, we're arguing about vaccines. Should we take? Should we not take? And here, nothing. In France, 50% of people are refusing to take vaccine. So these are not unknown scenarios. But at the government's level, when you have to open your university, open your factories, what do you do then? Do you have, if you don't have a vaccine,
I agree with that. We can't have a lockdown. We can't have our schools shut. We can't have that happening.
Then there are people who are waiting to submit their theses. They can't enter their labs. I deal with students on daily basis. The kids who do not have any access to online education, etc. The flip side of this is not to rush around and vaccinate everybody. The vaccines are in the part of the world that we live, or the developing world, have hardly any vaccines. In fact, very large part of the world hasn't had any access to the vaccines. 80% of all vaccine produced today have been grabbed by 13% of the world.
Okay.
So what are we talking about? What are we debating right now? We are
debating. Vinita saying that some of the approvals have been done in a hurry when there isn't a need medically to press that panic button, is what I have summarized her position in. Not because Covaxin per se she believes will be unsafe, but because she says we don't know enough, and given that we don't know enough, we could have waited a few weeks. That's what we're debating.
Yeah, so there's absolutely, I have no problem in agreeing with Vinita on this. If you have a set of rules, you follow. Did you have enough data? If you have enough data, have you shared with everybody? If you haven't shared, was your communication of good quality? Is it only a communication problem? We have debated. All of us have debated this. Yeah. I would like to move on from this debate now.
Sudhir, can I bring you in? Yes, Sudhir, I think that's fair. And I think, Sudhir, I mean, whichever way you cut and slice the data, the fact is that where I do agree is because the country has been locked down, the world has been locked down for so long, it's just not going to open up without a vaccine program. I think that much is quite clear. But Vinita was making the argument that this should not set a precedent for how clearances are done in the future, and that is her real concern. And we've also had now questions about whether these vaccine manufacturers should be indemnified. We've had a whole controversy brewing in Bhopal, which we'll just take a look at. So there are going to be all sorts of ethical questions that are going to be thrown up by the mass speed at which this vaccine rollout program is happening, and how do we avoid or tackle those not avoid, but how do we tackle those questions? Sudhir.
So let me run through a couple of issues, and then your panelists and others can unpick them as they choose to.
Sure.
The first is that, what are we vaccinating for at this point? I agree we should vaccinate. At the point since we had a last chat on your column, we've gone down from about 200, 250 deaths to about 100 to 100. We're now at about 150, 160 deaths per day. So that's the point of your epidemic. You're clearly vaccinating vulnerable groups, vulnerable by comorbidity, vulnerable by age, vulnerable by health worker protection. That's one category of vulnerabilities, and that's your critical vulnerability. You're also beginning to vaccinate the economy in a sense. You're vaccinating the mobile task force, you're vaccinating other people. If you're vaccinating for the epidemic right now, it's unlikely that you're going to influence the course of the epidemic. The epidemic is actually sort of in decline. And by the time your immune system kicks in, it's going to be about a month or two. What you're really vaccinating for are variants. And I've studied the global data very carefully. And the country that worries me the most is South Africa. And your panelists can comment on that. And I'll tell you why. Because the South African peak, which was about 5-6 months ago, and then it was pretty flat, and now it's huge. They have a huge sharp upswing, which is also linked, presumably, to one of their variants with multiple mutations. So if you're vaccinating for a variant, which is what is your big worry, and the other reason South Africa I've picked as opposed to the West is because of latitude issues, climate issues, demographic issues. I was looking for a country which I should be worried about. And that's my country of worry right now.
Not the United Kingdom, which is also grappling.
Yes,
right
but
now
I'll tell you why. Because I'm looking for countries which sort of, in some sense, fit our demographics, which in some sense fit our climate issues, in some sense fit the kind of issues. And there, if you had a variant coming up 6 months later, then that's a serious cause for worry. So if you're vaccinating at this point, what you're really vaccinating for is the slightly longer term. And I've covered the vulnerable groups. I've taken that point completely. Apart from the economic issues, so what you should really be doing, apart from clinical trials, I mean, whether Covaxin is in clinical trial mode or not is not the question. You have to study your vaccine rollout. Study correlates of protection. Figure out what the efficacy, I mean, if you can't do efficacy by transmission dynamics, which is one of the things that I mentioned last time because of the drop in infection rates, try and figure out what your surrogate or direct markers of immunology are in terms of efficacy. Try and figure out what your long-term memory responses are. Those are going to be your critical issues. I would also sequence on scale so that you have some sense of what the variant population out here is. So if you're going to get variants coming up, you're ready for them. As far as I'm concerned, scale, and we can talk about the scale issue of how one should think about scale. Can it only be done by the government or should be done by the private sector and so on? That's something we can cover.
Can I just ask like a dumb question here? My understanding is that if tomorrow a vaccine is not responsive to a mutation, then only Pfizer and Moderna, because they are different from the inactivated virus approach, or they're different from the weakened virus modified genetically, the Oxford AstraZeneca approach, you will not be able to reconfigure, repurpose that vaccine so quickly if it doesn't work against a mutation. Am I wrong?
That's not correct. So
okay, please correct me, because please explain what happens if a vaccine is not responsive to a mutation.
That's not correct. Historically, the reason why inactivated vaccines have worked, apart from the fact that we talked about before that they don't generate CTLs, is that inactivated vaccines.
What is a CTL?
A CTL is a cytotoxic T lymphocyte.
Right.
And the classic viral infection, which you replicate in some sense, to some extent with one of the vaccines, the adenovirus vaccine, actually in part, because you get internal mRNA expression, you will get a cytotoxic T lymphocyte recognition. With inactivated vaccines, historically, you don't. But you get T cell help, you get a range of other responses. The question really is that with inactivated vaccines, because you have a range of proteins out there, you immunize across the spectrum. Our obsession with the spike protein is because it's the dominant protein, but that's not the only protein either in infection or a vaccination. And genetic diversity, which operates at the level of the MHC, actually generates T cell help from the range of background proteins.
Okay, hold it. Because the point is that you're making such a sort of, expert's opinion that we may be losing those in our audience who do not follow this. I think the simpler summary of the point you're making is we're not vaccinating for the immediate. We are vaccinating for the long term. We are vaccinating for variants. Now, Dr. Chauhan,
we're vaccinating for both. I think we're vaccinating for vulnerable groups, and we must think about the long term.
Now, the question is, there's someone who referred to the Brazilian mutant strain and asking, how can I be sure the vaccine is effective against all the mutant strains so far? Dr. Chauhan and then Vinita, go ahead. And go ahead.
Very quickly, whether they're CTLs or T helper or this or that, the correlates of protection that we're looking for most vaccines, not only this vaccine, most vaccines, are really the neutralizing antibodies. And of course, if you have T cell responses, you should have T cell responses, you not get a good B cell. I don't want to start a basic immunology course. The only way, and I think Moderna and both the Pfizer have made a claim that their vaccine will be successful against. So these experiments just need to be done as you vaccinate people. As more where mutants will emerge, and they will emerge. I don't see why they will not emerge everywhere. It's a largish protein. It's about 270 residues. Some changes in amino acid. If there's no change in amino acid, then don't worry about that mutant. If there are some changes in amino acid, all you have to figure out. The experiment to be done is very simple, and it's being done. It's being done everywhere, I can assure you. You immunize people with the vaccine that you have, pull out the serum or antibodies, and go to the lab and test whether those antibodies neutralize your mutants or not. And Barkha, as I tell you, these experiments will continue to be done.
Right,
There
it's
is
a
no
work in
escape
progress.
from it.
I
If you
agree.
think that we have an answer, no, so early answer from Pfizer, again only from the company. I've not seen the published data that that it will protect you against the B1.1.17 mutant, which is the UK mutant. If tomorrow 3 more mutant come, unless you do the experiment, you should
How would
not
you
and you
know?
cannot claim.
So,
Nobody should claim that this vaccine will protect, that will not protect, this will be better, that will. You just got to go to the lab,
but
isolate.
from a user point of view, I want to understand this. And right after Vinita, please jump in. I get the vaccine. Then comes a new mutation in my country, whichever country it is. Let's talk about India. Then our scientists are back, and looking at that and seeing whether that vaccine is effective against that new mutation that they haven't yet anticipated, right? Do I go back and get another vaccine? I'm sorry if my question seems very elementary, but I know most people in our audience will want to know exactly this. Like, how many times might I need a vaccine? Will I need a new vaccine every time there's a new mutation? Maybe not, maybe yes. Yes, Veer?
So quickly,
Yeah.
Vinita, just half a second. We
Yeah.
have example of measles vaccine and very successful polio vaccine. For your audience, I'll make it very simple. These vaccines have been used forever, highly successful, and the viruses keep mutating. You keep getting new strains of polio, keep getting new strains of measles.
That's a
So
good
if
point.
that is something to go by, I'm not saying that mutants will be neutralized by this vaccine or that vaccine. You just got to understand this virus. We are very much in the middle of understanding the virus. So please, let's not rush out and say this will happen, that will happen, this will not happen. We are immunizing for this, we are not immunizing for that. These are very hasty times. I don't think. I think we should just do experiments and then transparently share with everybody the results.
Okay, I think the polio reference and the measles reference is a very interesting one. Vinita, please go ahead and jump in.
Yes, what I feel is that in addition to what Professor Chauhan was saying, that we normally use neutralizing antibody as a surrogate marker for effectiveness of the vaccine and whether it can prevent further disease by the same virus. So what will happen is currently there are mutations creeping in, what Sudhir is saying, and South Africa, many others. But there is the spike protein or its domain which is binding to the receptor, and there is a receptor. I'm simply using the screen since we have the screen. So it is not just one antibody which is going to neutralize, so to say. There will be many B cells in the body which will be responding to this. So even for a receptor binding small portion of the spike protein, there might be so many different antibodies which are generated by the vaccine as well as infection. One single mutation at a time may knock off one antibody or two antibodies, say out of 10 or 12 which are generated. But once in one stroke, all say 10 or 12 antibodies which are generated by either vaccine, existing vaccine or infection are not going to become completely useless. It's a process which is a cumulative process.
But does it
so
result?
It will happen.
Does it
the
result
remaining
what happens after?
Correct. Remaining 8 or 10 antibodies which are already generated may not be as effective instead of 12 or 13, but they will still contribute to the protection, and the new antibodies will also get triggered when you have a fresh infection. So it's a cyclical process, and in that sense, I'm less worried about the resistance. Of course, there will be some resistance generated to the vaccine, no doubt about it, but we don't need to think about it as hanging sword just now, not hanging above our head. It is somewhere there. It is likely to come down, hopefully not fall on our head. We have, in most of us, have competent immune system to even mount in an immune response to reinfection. This is a fresh response which will protect us.
Okay, I have about a couple of minutes left, so time to take last comments. Sudhir, I'll start with you. Vaccine manufacturers could now be open to a whole slew of lawsuits. It's already started happening. You've seen controversies. During the Oxford AstraZeneca trial, there was a controversy and a legal lawsuit, and Oxford AstraZeneca countersued. Now we're seeing the same thing happening in Bhopal, where NGOs are claiming, that during the trial precautions were not taken. Covaxin is denying it. My question is a larger question, because we have no evidence to know one way or the other, but we're going to see a slew of these questions in the course of the next few months. What is the liability of the vaccine manufacturers at this point, according to you, Sudhir?
We've done phase 1 trial, for example, for 2 malaria vaccines, and trials business is very straightforward and should not be shoddy and should be followed to the T. So when you're doing phase trial, which are trial, then you have to insurance is given to every single person which is under trial. This is part of the doing the trial. Some people, suppose I'm dealing with 40,000 people and I don't do any immunization at all.
Yeah,
you could have a death, 1 or 2 in the 40,000 people which you have done nothing to. But when you do a trial of 30, 40,000 people, 1 person dying or 2%, by natural consequences of life, some people can die. Whether that death has occurred due to vaccine or has not occurred due to vaccine is what need to be ascertained. If it is death occurred due to the vaccine, then you have to be very cautious about that vaccine. But you could have deaths which have nothing to do with the vaccine, although you received the vaccine.
Yeah. So I think the question you're making, Veer Chauhan, is that you have to establish what the cause is, and my point is that who establishes that, right? That can just take absolutely forever. It can become a media debate. It can become a he said debate. Sudhir, if you want to jump in there, Sudhir Krishna.
I just need to finish one point about what Vinita and Veer were saying, was that I would actually extend the neutralizing antibodies. I was going to come to that about neutralizing antibodies and additional variants to even people who are not vaccinated. Because your seropositives, your infected, your asymptomatic carriers, they probably carry the biggest clues as to the kind of the immune response which will be actually effective and useful of vaccine design. It's a technical point, but it goes into the larger point that I was making early on, that you can't stop studying the immune response to the disease right now when you're vaccinating. As a scientist, public health, clinician, you have to accelerate what you're studying, and it has nothing to do with the clinical trial mode of Covaxin and so on. Study the immune response extensively, because that's where your strength lies. And even as a manufacturing country, extending your trials elsewhere, the more data that you have, the more study designs that you have, the better off you are. Sorry, but I just needed to finish that point.
Okay, now can we come in with concluding remarks? They'll have to be short for all three of you, please. I'm out of time. On indemnity, liability, what should be the liability for the vaccine manufacturers? Vinita, I'll start with you, and then Sudhir, and then Dr. Chauhan can have the last word. Yes.
Yes, I think as long as phase 3 trials are concerned, I do think that, so for mass vaccination, indemnity is something that worries me, and somebody should be responsible. It's not that if there is a vaccine-related death, nobody is responsible. That is not fair. But at the same time, what I would like to make as a point is that in legal cases, when there is an accused goes scot-free because of incomplete or inadequate evidence. Medical science is of that kind, that you may have some associative evidence, but cause and effect relationship may be very hard to establish, in which case, who is responsible for death? And what Professor Chauhan was saying, that people also die of natural causes, and those should be compared in the population. Unfortunately, in India, we do not have epidemiological data of this kind. How many people have, say, neurological disease in normal population of one kind, and is that occurring at a higher frequency in the vaccinated individuals? In
All
the
right, so-
absence of this data, it is hard to say. But I think the people, especially poor people and many, not just poor, everybody should be compensated if it is a vaccine-related death.
The point, of course, then becomes, is it a vaccine-related death or not?
Agree.
And there the data is weak, or, that's the point you're
Yeah.
making. So it's a conundrum.
Yeah.
Sudhir, how would you solve this conundrum?
It is very important for the
One second, Dr.
manufacturer.
Chauhan. Dr. Chauhan, just once again, I'm giving you the last word. Let Sudhir just take that, and then you can wrap it up for us. Sudhir.
So I actually went and looked at, I forget the names elude me, I'm not sure that's Pfizer or Moderna. I went and looked at one of the mRNA trials, which was fairly large, to see what were the adverse events across the placebo and the trial group, the people who actually got the vaccine. And, at first glance, and I looked at it about an hour or two before your show, was the fatalities and the serious adverse events was pretty much the same in the placebo group. So, the point that was made that, things happen during the trial,
Yeah.
and you're in the placebo group, you don't even know whether it's a placebo group. But actually, when you look at the data retrospectively, they were pretty much the same.
Yeah.
I just do want to make a point here that, our vaccine manufacturers have been developing vaccines for the developing countries on a fairly large scale, and they partner with clinical trial groups. They've developed a good reputation. There's no per se evidence to believe that they don't have the best interests of vulnerable groups, which doesn't mean that one does not take into account whenever a complaint is made, or whether there's a particular site which hasn't gone according to correct protocols, or there's a increased vulnerability in a particular region, they should not be paying more attention to it. I think we're all on that page. But they have a good reputation, and that reputation is developed over many years of multiple vaccines.
Yeah, fair enough. Dr. Chauhan, last word. As the vaccine rolls out, let's look ahead. What's something to focus on? What's something to keep in mind? And how quickly can this be done? One advantage this country has, not just that we produce 60% of the world's vaccines, but that we know how to do mass vaccination programs. I think it's the one advantage we do actually have over much of the world. So your closing thoughts.
I fully agree with Sudhir's last comment. The manufacturer of vaccine or the government that roll out vaccine really are extremely careful before they roll them out, because of the nature of the vaccine. You give it to healthy people, not to the sick people. So these reputations in India have been created by these companies after a huge amount of solid work. I mean, this is a first generation vaccine producer. Krishna, the Bharat Biotech is the first generation vaccine producer. Anyone, anywhere, that a vaccine at cost has to be produced looks towards India. So come on, safety. I mean, these people they vaccinate almost whole of Africa, sitting from Pune or Hyderabad. So I think we should just remember that.
So I'm taking two things to feel better about in this program. One, Vinita's assessment, and which I anecdotally have shared in my reporting journey, that the fatality rate, the IFR, is not as high as we had first feared. And the second, Dr. Chauhan, I think that was quite poetic that you're actually vaccinating Africa sitting in Pune or Bangalore, and that's something to think about. And I think most people are looking for their lives, maybe not to return fully to normal, but to feel better than they did in 2020. And I really hope we can look ahead at that with all the valid questions that all three of you have raised. And that is the job of ethicists, to keep pushing the boundaries of what the ethics should be. That's also never unimportant. So thank you, Vinita, for raising some of those questions. Sudhir and Veer, as always, lots to learn from all three of you. Thank you very much. And we'll have all of you back.